New minimum wage has been gazetted. As of Wednesday this week, South African workers are now entitled to a minimum hourly rate of 25 Rand 42 cents. But the obvious question is this enough considering the high cost of living in the country? And if so, perhaps what are the gaps in enforcing these rates, given just how much has taken place so far? Let's unpack this for you now. Bring in Zwelinzima Vavi. He's the General Secretary of Saftu, joining us via our video link today. Great to see you as always, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time for this conversation. And not a new conversation, I'll admit that much, but hopefully we are moving in the right direction. 25 Rand 42 cents. Many people might be asking how this is determined to begin with and whether you're happy with that process.
Well, no, we're not happy. If you remember, we came into the prominence as the new federation when we took up a battle against the imposition of that national minimum wage, when it was at that time 19 Rand and 20 Rand an hour. After, say, 6 years, 7 years now, it is moving like a tortoise to 25 Rand. 25 Rand an hour is an insult to the country's workers who produce the wealth of the country, that makes the IMF, World Bank, and the Citibank to tell the world that South Africa is the fifth wealthiest country in the world. The problem, as demonstrated by this 25 Rand, is that the wealth of South Africa is being plundered, is being occupied by a 10% of its country's population, which sits on a 90% wealth of the land. And therefore it means that 90% of the population must share between them only 10% of the wealth of this country. Take that matter further. A mere 1% of the country's population possesses wealth of 45% of all wealth in the country, and which means 99% of the population must share wealth that is 55%. And this is grossly what makes South Africa to be the most unequal society in the entire world. Now, the national minimum wage, including this insulting SRDs of 350 rands per month, is part and parcel of the strategy of the government of the day that distribute wealth from the poor to the rich.
Sure. Yeah, and South Africa's Gini coefficient is well documented, really not where we'd like it to be. But Mr. Vavi, you know the discussions around minimum wage, right? Part of what is often put on the table is currently there are some companies that are just barely able to pay their workers because of a whole range of issues. There are going to be people who, as soon as you push the minimum wage beyond a certain threshold, will have to start letting go of their workers. And those are workers who now have nothing as opposed to something. Are you finding that we're making any kind of headway around that defense?
The problem is that that's a genuine reason. Some companies may not be able to pay even the 25 Rand, and worst of all, the 4,000 rands that Saftu argues that must be a guarantee salary just to afford workers food. And we're not even talking about the 12,500 wage that the mine workers took a strike about in 2012. There will always be instances where individuals, companies, including farm bosses and employers of domestic workers who are unable to pay that minimum wage. There is built into the system of labor in South Africa something that we call exemptions. Everyone that have a genuine reason that can prove that he or she cannot afford to pay those rates of a minimum wage must apply for exemption. The problem with exemption for the companies who are unscrupulous is that they will be forced to put the facts on the table, to open their books to workers that they employ, so that indeed workers can see that they are not accumulating obscene levels of profits and that they are not paying their CEOs and directors obscene levels of salaries and board fees whilst they are pleading poverty to workers. So when we open that issue up, suddenly people want to make general statements about unaffordability of the minimum wage. You know, it is affordable until you can prove to your own workers that you cannot afford this, and therefore they must beg you in applying for the exemption in the Department of Labor.
Yeah, and as you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, this has been a struggle years in the making, and I suppose it's going to be a struggle that continues on multiple fronts. These sentiments, I imagine, are shared by organizations like the EFF. We know they're planning a march later on this month. Would that be a march that Saftu supports?
We are working with the EFF to make sure that this is not just an EFF march and demonstration. We're working with them to make sure that this is a working class march. This is the march of the marginalized, poor majority whose face remain black 28, 29 years after democracy. So yes, Saftu will work hard to ensure that every working class formation, every left-leaning political party, every trade union federation joins that demonstration, because we're building a new frontier of unity amongst the workers. We're building unity between organized workers and the youth, organized workers and the students' movements, organized workers and the women organization, as well as general communities who are leading the protests against service delivery in our rural areas, townships, and towns. That's the type of a program that we are embarking upon. And so it's no longer just an EFF march. This is beginning to be a working class march, a frontier of the poor, who are saying to this government and who are saying to the system of capitalism itself, we can't go on. We can't just be watching our country going down the tubes. We are tired of load shedding. We can't cope with these levels of unemployment. We can't have a situation where 8.9 million, that's nearly 9 million of young people of this country who are not in any employment, any training, any education institution. This is a recipe for a disaster. This is what is going to ignite one day. This is a powder keg, a ticking bomb. We are sitting on as a country which is going to explode one day and take us straight to the situation Libya is in today. We want the organized revolution. We want a revolution that must be led by ideological, political, conscious people of our country, to say the system of capitalism itself was never designed to address even the most basic needs of our communities. And worst of all, this government has been captured by that system, has been captured by the people who are the 1% who are occupying the wealth of the country, and they are now dishing out austerity programs, cutting budgets, left, right, and center. That makes life to even be more impossible to live in our country. And we're saying enough is enough.
So would this be an apolitical march as far as you're concerned, at least if you have your way?
No.
I'm sure there are people. I'm sure there are people, for instance, who are going to be looking at the optics, right? The EFF, known to be in opposition of the governing ANC, Saftu's positionality around the ANC and co-governance through the tripartite alliance. Help us reconcile those things briefly.
This is a political strike. That's the first point that we must make. It's not an apolitical action. It's a political statement that is being made by workers, the poor, the youth, the women, the marginalized majority in our country, who are saying that we can't just be folding hands and seeing our country going down the tube. It's a political statement. It's a political strike. and we are not ashamed to reiterate that point. But we want to be a non-sectarian strike. We want to be a non-sectarian demonstrations and a shutdown. We want it to embrace unity with the rest of the other left-leaning political parties, working class formations, the youth, the students, the women, and every grouping that has been fighting isolated battles that are militant, but that does not make a difference because they are not coordinated at the national level, and therefore makes no impact and gets ignored willy-nilly by the government or even by the media these days. They only report about protest action when workers and communities close their highways and the roads. We don't want that. We want a responsive government that is going to say, yes, we are hearing you on load shedding. Here's our plan to ensure that we put an end to it, and we take collective responsibility for putting our country to this disaster of load shedding that is being felt in the main by the working class of our country who are losing their jobs as we speak, left, right, and center. We want a government that will say, we hear you, that our education is dysfunctional and it is excluding millions of people. Just look at the statistic that was issued by Sunday Times just 2 weeks ago, saying that every year there are 4 million applications to our universities and technicals in our country, and yet only 169 of them get spaces in these institutions. That's why you're seeing students advert to the demonstration, and Saftu throws its weight fully behind the demonstrating students of VET and the University of Johannesburg, and calls on all other students that are being excluded to unite with those that are inside, and calls on workers to join those demonstrations because it is their children that are being funneled into unemployment that is structural in our country.
Zwelinzima Vavi, thanks for your time, sir. Appreciate your weighing in on this. Zwelinzima Vavi is the General Secretary of Saftu, confirming to us there that Saftu is planning to join that planned march by the EFF come the 20th of March, amongst other things. Plenty